Okay, everyone, welcome to the Freedom Hub Working Group weekly webinar with your co-host, Jeff Cantor and Charles Froman. I am Charles Froman, and let's see, Jeff Cantor is on vacation this week, so I'll be doing my best to keep our standards as high as we possibly can. If everyone joining can mute themselves and cut their video, we're just going to feature the guest. And you'll see our main website right there is mphwf.com, the marketplace for health, wealth, and freedom. We are the disruptors intersection, whether you're an activist or an entrepreneur. We have another webinar at 7 o'clock on Wednesdays on healthcare, since that's how Jeff and I make our money, is taking on the insurance companies to give folks a better deal through sharing. And those are the websites that you could go to watch past recordings. This is our main website. There we go. This is our website where you can go to see the guests that we have every week. It's mphwealthfreedom.com/webinars. There you can see the write-up for Dr. McKinney. And next to her is the write-up for our health guest tonight about employer plans tonight, how they're not meeting their fiduciary responsibilities. And if you scroll down, you'll see upcoming guests. And most importantly, we like to give our guests an opportunity to continue the conversation with participants and anyone else interested in the topic. And you would click here. And if you did that, you would... let's see here, go to continuing the conversation, where all of our guests are listed by their picture, and you can click on the image and communicate with them directly. We are sponsored by the WOW Health Cash Appointments app, which is very disruptive right now, as you know, in healthcare, very opaque market where aren't readily knowable or usable. And if you go to this part of the website, you can learn more about WOW for patients or doctors or employers or individuals, or even if you want to make some money helping us recruit employers and patients. Everyone needs side gigs. This is a good one, because cash payment is the future of healthcare. We've had great guests over the past 2 years, and we'd like to advertise their campaigns. On the Freedom tab under Fighting for Freedom, you can look at all of these buttons to help your freedom and liberty and justice in all kinds of ways. And we have lots of organizations listed here and some controversial videos that we like to highlight at the bottom. Going back to our guest, let me discuss our guest, Dr. McKinney, before I turn the controls over to her. So there's the write-up you can read about on your own. I met her back in the 90s when I was a lobbyist, fresh from being a congressional staffer for the mortgage brokers. And Ms. McKinney then was on the banking committee, and I got along pretty well with her staffer, a guy named David, whose last name escapes me, so maybe Cynthia can remind me. So it was at a fundraiser. I probably met Ms. McKinney. Usually I went to the ones organized by the independent bankers, the small community banks, maybe the realtors or somebody. And I didn't hear much about her for a long time until in 2002, she made the risky decision to join the worldwide effort for an honest investigation of the terrorism that occurred on 2001. I don't think many folks can really think the government has explained every mystery about that fateful day that has changed the world since. And that's the point of today's webinar, is when you make risky decisions that aren't safe for re-election, you jeopardize your re-election, you jeopardize your reputation, but mainly only in the short term. Because anyone that's gone down the rabbit hole or asked tough questions knows that the best history regards heroes who went against the grain, the Mavericks, or those who obeyed Thomas Jefferson's axiom that the highest form of patriotism is civil disobedience, and people should not forget Jefferson said that. And and if you know history, his 1800 revolution was a counter-revolution against the nationalists who were kind of losing the spirit of the independence effort in the first place. She lost re-election because of her controversial decisions, and she got reelected. But when she did, this is so telling, she wasn't given her past seniority for these key committees where she could have done some real damage: armed services, international affairs, because she was taking the Bush administration head on for the lies that killed so many of our kids in the Iraq War and elsewhere, and led to this police state, the 9/11 with Homeland Security. Eventually, she left Congress and she ran for president as a Green. And what's really nice is she co-signed this agreement with Ron Paul and the third-party presidential candidates. Basically, among all the provisions, I could boil it down to opposing endless war, interventions overseas, and the interventions domestically, specifically for the welfare that goes to corporations, crony welfare, such as the Fed. And we all recall Occupy Wall Street back in 08, 09, which was a place where libertarians and progressives united against this Fed-led inflation and bailouts to those who were too big to fail. Since that time, she's criticized the Libya atrocity. She has demanded equal treatment of the Palestinians in the Middle East. She's written some great books like How the U.S. Creates Shithole Countries. What a great title. They're not shitholes. They become that way because of our interventions. She has a new book out on COVIDs and the connections with China. She really has made the most of her notoriety to get behind great campaigns. And so with that.
Great. So I will thank you for inviting me to come on your show. And then I'll just sort of get started here. I'm Cynthia McKinney, and I'm going to talk about, hey, I didn't vote for a swamp monster. How good people are crushed once we elect them to public office. So I have a couple of these Ben Garrison cartoons that are really good. And the first one mentions something that we have spoken about more publicly currently than in the past, and that is the deep state. And in 2016, when candidate Trump was campaigning across the country, one of the things he said was, we're going to drain the swamp. The other thing he said was that the system is rigged. And these had public currency because people understood that something was desperately wrong with our country. And maybe they couldn't define it. Maybe they could only describe it. Maybe they couldn't even describe it, but they knew something was wrong. And so when Trump said the system is rigged, that sounded about right. When he said drain the swamp, that sounded about right. And the deep state and the swamp are nothing new.
What's your problem? I said, what's your problem? Orange Day, sir. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Here you are, sir. Thank you.
So that was an excerpt from the movie They Live. And I guess maybe what it tells us is that the, the, the swamp and the deep state were always there, but now that you've seen them, you can't unsee them. And so now let's see what else we can not see, we can't unsee. Well, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Syria. Now I've been to Iraq. I went to Iraq with a delegation of people, and honestly, we all left there sick. And that's because the United States used depleted uranium for how many years, and is still using those depleted uranium munitions that I tried to stop when I was in Congress. Libya, look at Libya. Look at what the United States has done to Libya. And I have to say, you know, we have allowed the individuals who control the United States government to do these things to other countries. I've been to Libya. I was there under the bombing, and it resulted in a book that I wrote, The Illegal War Against Libya. Yemen, I haven't been to, but look at the before and after for Yemen, and look at the before and after for Syria, where I've felt the US sponsored bombs in Syria as well. And I don't know, you know, the ultimate objective, but one that is very clear is that these areas are going to be redeveloped, and who's going to get the opportunity to do that? If we look at what has happened with Gaza, another place that I have been, and I've seen the rubble that has been left by the US sponsored wars that Israel carries out against the people of Gaza. And on the other side, you see, well, at least one real estate developer in Israel is saying, okay, we can't wait for the people, you know, just bulldoze the people out so we can develop it and make luxury in Gaza, luxury real estate in Gaza. But what this tells us is that we're able to do this for so long is that whoever that deep state is, whatever the personalities are that comprise the deep state, and the deep state is both Democrats and Republicans, this is what they desire. And so therefore, we could say the deep state directs US military actions. So now, according to Dr. Peter Dale Scott, there's a deep state and there's a public state. The public state, you recognize their faces, you recognize their names. You might not recognize this one down here, This is Ban Ki-moon, Joe Biden, and Susan Rice. But these are the people who are trusted by the deep state. And the deep state, we don't know, well, those of us who study, like Peter Dale Scott, studies these individuals, we know who they are, but the general public has no idea who these deep state actors are. But they can wield the US military. In addition to that, if you look at University of Amsterdam, I believe, did a study, and what they found was the 2008 so-called economic crisis, financial crisis. Basically, it was a shift in the ownership of the deep state. Before 2008, deep state players were one set of individuals. After 2008, deep state players were another set of individuals. And then what happened was that we could tell by who the majority shareholders were of the Fortune 500 companies. And it turns out that after the 2008 so-called financial crisis, the number 1, 2, and 3 companies that were shareholders in Fortune 500 companies were BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. So this is the result of the study that was done by University of Amsterdam. And we'll focus on BlackRock, which is the largest one.
There's a good chance you've never heard of BlackRock. Founded in only 1988, in less than 30 years, this American financial firm would grow to become the company that owns the world, managing assets worth $6.3 trillion. These are assets that belong to their clients, mainly the pension funds of ordinary people, teachers, police officers, nurses, and many more. And that's just the beginning. BlackRock has also developed a software platform called Aladdin to perform risk analysis for its clients. It receives sensitive data from banks, insurance companies, and other important institutions. Through Aladdin, BlackRock has insights about the management of financial assets worth another $20 trillion. BlackRock also has shares and voting rights in many of the biggest European companies, in sectors such as energy, oil and gas, transportation, food, and of course, finance. The company holds public debt in the form of bonds and has real estate interests. And still, there's more. Our Rock, you see, wears many hats. Aside from being an investor, it is also an auditor and an advisor. Governments and central banks invite a BlackRock subsidiary called BlackRock Solutions to audit them and to provide advice about the management and rescue of banks. Yet at the same time, BlackRock is often a major shareholder in these same banks. In other words, the company often sits on both sides of the table. BlackRock Solutions gets privileged access to highly sensitive information that could be valuable to BlackRock itself. Does this constitute a conflict of interest? No, says BlackRock, which claims that the company has established Chinese walls between its different subsidiaries. In January 2018, BlackRock's founder and chairman, Larry Fink, sent a letter to all of the CEOs of the companies BlackRock is invested in, asking them to do more than deliver financial performance and make a positive contribution to society. So BlackRock not only owns the world, it also wants to save it?
So these kinds of corporations with this kind of financial power don't just happen by themselves. And so what we can say is that the deep state anoints the swamp. Now, if you look at the average cost of running for a congressional seat, if you want to run for the United States Senate, it's over $15 million. And you've got to raise something like $4 million, $5 million every day. You've got to raise so many thousands of dollars in order to make your 15 million. And for the House, it's about $2 million. So here you can see that on average, the Republicans are able to spend a little bit more than the Democrats are. And as a result of that, what you will hear is that the Democrats will talk a lot more about income inequality than the Republicans will, because the Republicans have access to more resources. So unfortunately, though, if we look at, say, the last few decades, what we can see is that the wealthy have gotten uber wealthy and the middle class has lost ground. And we can see that there. And so that income inequality in the United States is actually the worst of all of the G7 countries. When it takes this amount of money to run a viable campaign, then we can see money is a political mechanism of control. Now, what happens is when you win, you go to Washington, D.C., and you basically leave your family behind. A lot of times you get lonely, you lacking for excitement, and there are predators like the Epsteins and the Ghislaine Maxwells who are there to satisfy your every need for a price. And so we can see that with Clinton, Donald Trump. Some people even just want to meet royalty, and the Epsteins provided an opportunity to associate with royalty. But at the end, sex becomes a mechanism of political control as well. So now what you would say is, okay, we've elected these representatives, and the representatives are supposed to represent us, and instead something terrible has happened to our system of governance. And what Ronald Heifetz, a leadership professor at Harvard, talks about is a reminder that there's no such thing as a broken system. The features of today's system, political system, reflect the values of the people who hold power in it. And so the system is broken for us, but the system is not broken for them. We have to understand that. So now, if your member of Congress acts as if this global complex system is normal, then your member of Congress has become a swamp monster. And generally what happens when we're sworn in, we're taken aside, at least Democrats taken aside, and we were told back then, well, the general public hates the institution, but they love you. And so what I'm trying to say is that the individuals that constitute, say, for example, the institution of Congress, when we talk about the swamp, we're talking about them. And somehow we turn a blind eye to the behavior of our own representative. The system is rigged, and it has been rigged. We have also been rigged to not notice the rigging. So the challenge that rests before us is to unrig ourselves so we can begin the arduous task of destroying the criminal system of governance that we have in the United States and transforming it to one that reflects our unrigged values, ethics, and morals. Now, there have been people who have tried to sound the alarm. And Paul Findley, who wrote the book They Dare to Speak Out, is one of them. Gus Savage, who explained the power of, in particular, the Israel lobby. But we know that lobbies exist, and these lobbies are paid for by corporations, and that gives them more power than the average citizen. Means that we have to get together and use the power of our numbers to balance or counterbalance the power of the corporations. We've got me. I wrote the book on Libya. That's me in front of the house that Barack Obama bombed, the house that belonged to the family of Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi's grandchildren were killed in that bombing, and it's a war crime. It's a crime against humanity. Barack Obama walks free today. And the same goes for all of the other countries that have been victims of US bombing and the presidents that ordered those bombings. How the US creates S-hole countries, of course, we know President Trump made the comment. And so I thought I would take advantage of that comment and educate people about the role of US foreign policy in the creation of those S-hole countries. I also wrote a piece about the US hybrid warfare abroad and how that hybrid warfare now has come home. And I asked the question, is it chickens come home to roost? And what exactly, so I explore the Purple Revolution, or the so-called Purple Revolution. We have Jeff Gates, who was a congressional staffer. He served on the Senate side. He wrote about his observations. Gilad Atzmon, as an insider and observer, wrote about his observations. Allison Weir has written about her observations. So there's lots of information out there. It's just a matter of people having the willingness to understand what's gone wrong with US governance and how we can correct what's gone wrong. So you might say, hey, I didn't vote for a swamp monster. So same dollars, just different shells to make it look better.
Exactly, Cynthia. And here's the kicker on this. So they spent probably at least $100 million of Georgia taxpayer money that they didn't need to spend. They could have run hand-marked paper ballots and ballot on demand. So that was one thing. But then they financed it with a 20-year bond. So that was another 40 million or so in interest. And that the shelf life of the equipment is only 10 years. So they financed with a 20-year bond. The taxpayers are going to be paying for the system 10 years after it's obsolete. And then they're calling themselves conservatives. So it's a joke. So it was actually, in this case, it was actually the Democrats who were the conservatives, not the Republicans. So, but,
so basically what we have, again, is another instance of people going to Atlanta, in this case, from all over the state of Georgia. And once they become, quote unquote, insiders, or they feel themselves to be insiders, then they can work deals that benefit them to the detriment of the public that they are supposed to represent.
Exactly. And I know that's going on all over the Capitol. It's not just on voting, but that's the scenario that the voters don't understand and can't really cope with, and it's hard to do anything about that.
So unfortunately, we have a lot of people who vote for swamp monsters, not realizing that they're voting for swamp monsters. And these are the kinds of results that you get. You get these interminable wars. I watched the presentation of the gentleman from antiwar.com, and you get an economic system that doesn't make sense. You get a representative form of government that doesn't do much in terms of representing folks. And so we've got to change the way we think and understand that the swamp is really just about darn near everyone in Washington, D.C. If they can stay there for 20 years, they're the swamp. And that's the end of my presentation.
That was great, Cynthia. Dr. McKinney, and folks want to click the raise hand icon, which they'll find under the reactions tab. We'll take Q&A. And as you think of your questions, I have a few to start off with, Dr. McKinney. On that last bit regarding bonds to finance elections and Democrats being conservatives and Republicans being, I guess, progressives, or did that? I didn't get that point totally. Did that regard voting corruption in some capacity, or what was that about?
Yes, actually, Georgia came under a lot of scrutiny in the because of its failure, quite frankly, in the 2020 election. And that gentleman who was speaking is Garland Favorito, who is a member of the Constitution Party, but he's probably one of the foremost, most knowledgeable persons who is litigated in the country on these electronic voting machines. Georgia, as you might be aware, was the first state to deploy them after the disastrous 2000 presidential election. And those voting machines were hackable. And so Georgia basically was ordered to get a better system. Well, they got a different system. It's not better. And then what the Republican majority legislature in Georgia did was, as Garland was explaining, the machines have a shelf life of 10 years, but the taxpayers will be paying them for the next, it's over $100 million contract for machines that are not verifiable, not accountable, not recountable, all the things that you want in a election system, they don't have, but they had good lobbyist contacts. So even the equipment that we use to vote on is produced by the swamp.
Yeah, that corruptibility of those machines is got to make someone question whether that might have something to do with who gets elected, despite whoever you vote for in the booth.
Well, it actually it does, because in 2006, I absolutely know that I won the election, but the electronic voting machine, which was used in the state of Georgia, well, they broke down in the middle of the night. Let's revisit that for 2020. And when they came out, I was not, I no longer had the lead, and I stayed behind the entire rest of the night. So some citizens who were constituents of mine filed a lawsuit, and the state of Georgia testified under oath that you just have to trust that the person that we announce as the winner is the winner. So Bev Harris from Black Box Voting called it blind faith voting. And that's what people in the United States have done ever since the advent of the electronic voting machines. But that just makes fraud more possible on a more massive scale. But elections were rigged even before that, because if you look at 2000 in Florida, so basically what the Republicans did, and it always seems to be the black vote that's kind of played, but the Republicans imported convicted felon lists from other Republican controlled states like Texas, George W. Bush's state, and he was on the ballot at the time in Florida, and Ohio. And then they used the names to tell black people when they went to the polls to vote, you're a convicted felon. And these black people were not convicted felons, but in the state of Florida, convicted felons couldn't vote. And so this was a way to disfranchise the black community in the state of Florida in 2000. And that's how we ended up getting the electronic voting machine. So the solution is actually worse. The cure is worse than the problem.
Yeah, thanks for that. David, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Charles. Cynthia, if politics is making things worse by enabling and sustaining the elite power structure, what alternative private sector solutions can you suggest to stop and reverse the erosion of our freedoms?
Okay, the erosion of our freedoms. Well, the erosion of our freedoms started a long time ago because some of us never had any freedom. And so the challenge has always been to include everyone who is a citizen in the affairs of the Republic. And what the criminal gang that has seized control of our governance structure now, what they want to do is to concentrate the power in ever smaller, fewer, I should say, hands. And so that concentration is something that we should not agree with. Now, the only way that we can, in my mind, that we can counter that concentration of power coupled with the technology of control that's available now is that we've got to spread the opposition. We've got to be welcoming of people who are also opposed to their system of governance. And so that means we got to find allies. It's not just enough for one group of people who lost power to say, okay, we lost power, we're going to fight and we're going to win it back, because you are not going to get it back. The mechanisms of control on the individual level, on the state level, on the local level, on the national level, and the technological level, those mechanisms of control, and out in outer space. So we've got to have a whole new way of thinking in order to organize the private sector in a different way. And so that's why I say we have to unrig ourselves. We too have been rigged. We've been rigged for ever since this country was founded. People have been rigged, whether it was, okay, Black people can't vote, women can't vote, white men who don't own property can't vote. Whatever it was, we've got to have a more expansive view of whose republic it really is. It's all of us who love this country and want to be a part of this country, who were born in this country, raised in this country, naturalized as citizens in this country. Then we should have a tent that is open enough, large enough, so that everyone can find shelter there and that their ideas can be respected as well. That means that we've got to figure out a new way of doing things. Some people are decentralizing. For example, my son has the idea of starting an intentional community. And an intentional community It's just merely a voluntary association of people who come together, they choose to live together, they share values, and they create their own governance structure. And so I can agree with that. In fact, I when my son suggested it, I said, that's a good thing to do. And I will help you. So I'm trying to help my son as we investigate successful intentional communities, not only in the United States, but also in other countries across the globe. So that's one thing we can do. We don't have to abide by the Federal Reserve notes. And when I was campaigning in 2008 for the Green Party as their nominee for president, what I learned is that there are many communities that use time banking. They have different ways of accounting for time and energy and resources, and those different accounting methods all accrue to development of the community. However, the community defines its development goals. That is a good thing. And so we shouldn't be tied to how much money you have in the bank. Quite frankly, some people have too much money in the bank because the criminals are not being punished. How can whole countries be destroyed and those who ordered them destroyed not be punished? How can the soldiers who have come back, some have come back, many didn't come back. I think about Pat Tillman, didn't come back alive. But how can our soldiers be ordered off to faraway places, they come back and they not be taken care of? And George W. Bush goes to the court and says, well, those people who promised health care for the rest of their lives, well, they didn't have the authority to make that promise. So we the people are being used. And only once we recognize that we are being used, can we say, okay, we're going to throw off the shackles and we're going to join together with like-minded people, and we're going to eliminate those people who have criminally taken control of the United States government. Let me just say one thing. And there is a researcher, a working class researcher, who investigated the creation of the white race. And what he did was he wrote a book. The book actually ends up being several volumes, and it's called The Invention of the White Race. When in 1622, the colony of Virginia changed its law so that the whites who came over, the Europeans who came over as indentured servants, they were going to be treated like chattel bond slaves, like as the Africans were. Sorry, my throat. And so after about 50 years of this, what happened? Well, the Africans and the Europeans got together and they said, look, we are going to reject this treatment. And they fought together and they won. They won until, this is when you had the inauguration of the slave codes, the Black codes. So then legislation was created by the 1% that differentiated between the slaves of white skin with European background and the slaves of Black skin with African Black background. And not since that time have we been able to overcome that divide. That divide was created by people, the 1%, who said, never again will we have a situation where the Black slaves and the white slaves are going to come together. And that is when the researcher, Dr. Jeffrey Perry, is the one who tells the story, found that the white race came to be created. Because before then, you were Irish American, German American, but after the initiation of the legislation that was initiated in Virginia, and then it followed in all of the southern states, and so that's how we got to this point where some people are unwilling and unable to join with people of different ethnicity or different background, a different race, a different religion. And that's what we've got to get. That's a part of the rigging. And that's been very effective. And we've got to get beyond that so that we can, I would say, not only save the Republic, but move beyond the Republic. Because I'm already, if you look at if you take a global survey of republics, what you find in many cases is kakistocracy, where the most ill-prepared people are the ones who lead them. And in the case of the United States, psychopathocracy. And so you get these people who have no feelings, no empathy, no caring, no compassion, and no love for the country either. And yet they are in charge of the country. So I say we move beyond even a republic as a desired form of governance, and move to direct democracy or maybe some other forms of self-governance.
Ronwell, I have the last question for you, sir.
All right.
Sorry.
First of all, I hope you see the message I told you in private. Second of all, how can we draft you as a vice president for Governor Jesse Ventura, like for 2024, especially be for myself. So.
Well, well, first of all, Governor Ventura chose not to run in, 2020? And so, and I think there was a constituency that wanted him to run in 2016 as well. But for whatever reason, Governor Ventura chooses not to. And so I'm satisfied with his choice, and then we'll try and find some other candidate to support.
Well, very good. Cynthia, that was fantastic. And I want to thank you for your presentation. How can folks reach you?
Well, for the time being, I'm available on the typical social media, and I'm available online at my own website, www.allthingscynthiamckinney.com.